Hey, what is up guys? Today we're going to analyze the Biotic skills and I'm really excited about this one because there are definitely a lot of cool abilities over here. We have some weak ones as well, but I'm going to go over each and every single one of them and see how well the Biotic abilities synergize with one another. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with Pull. This is a combo primer and of course it also acts as an enemy disable. So as long as you hold the mouse button, you will be able to pick an enemy up, and if you combine it with throw, you can achieve some really cool results. You will basically be able to pull off enemies and throw them. Unfortunately, any enemy that is shielded or armored will be able to resist the hold function of this ability. It's still a combo primer, so you can technically use the tap portion of it and then detonate it with something. If you're planning to go on Insanity and use Pull, you're definitely going to feel left behind. Pull doesn't really do much damage. Its biggest advantage comes from the fact that you can actually grab either enemies or objects off the ground. So I would see a good situation in which, let's say, you could pick some explosive barrels off the ground and throw them into the enemy, but other than that, Pull is something that I wouldn't really recommend on the highest difficulty. Throw, on the other hand, even though it is quite similar, it's basically the second part of the same function, as in picking up enemies and throwing them up. Its biggest advantage is the fact that it has a high amount of force, a low cooldown, is actually a combo detonator, and it also does some damage. And of course you can spec it to throw two projectiles at the same time if you tap the button. And throw even has a enemy tracking, so if you're planning to sit behind cover, throw a singularity at a big group of enemies and detonate them, then throw can definitely tie in very well. It's definitely viable on Insanity. Its damage component is not going to be the best. Moving on to Charge, this is probably my favorite ability so far. It has a very low cooldown, it provides you with a very good shield up, and of course it provides with invincibility frames from the moment you charge it to the moment you land on the enemy. So even the small animation at the beginning acts as a invincibility frame. I would always pick in rank 4 damage and force. Radius is something that I don't really like picking on single target abilities. On top of that, the radius isn't really that big. 3.5 meters is quite low and the enemies tend to split up a lot. So damage is definitely the best one over here. In rank 5, both of the passives here are very good, and depending on your loadout, you're going to pick either weapons and melee if your damage is heavily focused on weapon damage, either on power synergy if you're going with a caster build, so to speak. In rank 6, I always go for Bastion. The fact that I have damage resistance and an additional 50% shield restored is definitely a big point. So if you spec in Bastion with rank 1 and rank 6 combined, you will recharge 100% of your shield with the charge ability alone. On top of that, Bastion gives you additional 35% damage, and that is a huge buff. Very good on Insanity. It is a both defense and offensive ability and it looks cool as hell. As a matter of fact, Charge in the Mass Effect Andromeda series was always overpowered. Moving on to Nova, this is again one of the abilities that I didn't really use that much, even though it looks cool as hell. The problem that I have with it is that it makes you static for the time that you cast it. So if I were to implement Nova into my build up, I would go with damage and force. Radius, there's other means I can increase it, so definitely go with damage and force. You're going to need it on Insanity. In rank 5, I always like picking anti-shields. Just the fact that Nova shatters shields so fast is astounding. You just jump in a group of enemy and with one single ground stomp you will destroy every shield out there. In rank 6, you can even make it a combo primer. If you don't have any combo primers in your build and you want to do that, then definitely pick Seismic Nova. It also increases damage and force. Shield powered, unfortunately the shield cost is 100%, so it's not as spammy as you might think. You won't be able to actually spam this ability too much. So between these two, I would say Seismic Nova is the better choice. Even if you don't need the priming of it, the damage and the force that you get on top of what you already have is definitely something to bring it on top. Moving on to Shockwave. Shockwave is an interesting ability. It acts as a combo detonation and you can spec it to be both detonator and primer. In rank 4, I would always pick damage and force. As I've said before, radius can be increased by other means. In rank 5, depending on your other abilities and or augmentations or mods, I would go with either recharge speed or reach. So if I had the fusion mod of adrenaline and I didn't need any recharge speed, I would go with the increased distance. The distance on Shockwave normally is quite low, so increasing it by another 50% is very noticeable. But if you don't use that, you can definitely pick the recharge speed. Pick up whichever loadout you have. In rank 6, if you pick the lifting Shockwave, it will now make this ability to act as a both combo detonator and primer, and you can achieve some really interesting results with that. You can endlessly detonate and prime targets for detonation, and it's way better than the other rank, which in my opinion is just boring, and this ability isn't that great versus armor to begin with. Annihilation, this is one of my favorite abilities in the Biotic tree. You can basically toggle it and keep it indefinitely. You can make it to have a huge range, and with the ranks present here and other passives in the Biotic tree, you can make it really crazy. So in rank 4, you have the choice of picking either the recharge penalty or the radius perk. Now this is one of the few Biotic abilities in which I would recommend the radius. That is because Annihilation already has a big radius, and increasing it by another 50% is definitely very good. In rank 5, I would go with damage attraction. That is because all the enemies affected by your Annihilation will receive 20% additional damage from all sources. In rank 6, I always like going with the draining field. It basically makes it so that any enemy under the effect of Annihilation that gets killed restores you 30% of your shield. And as I've said, if you increase its radius, all the enemies or most of the enemies will be affected, and the more you kill, the more you get shields back. Moving on to Backlash, this one is the barrier version of the barricade from the combat skill tree, but unlike that one, this one doesn't make you static. With this one you can move towards the enemy. The biggest downside of it is that you cannot shoot while holding it, and the best part of it, you can even make it reflect enemy damage. So in rank 4 you can go with either durability or recharge speed. I like to go with durability because I really want to make it feel like a real shield. In rank 5 you can also pick durability again, but I would rather pick reflection. You will be able to reflect 100% of the projectile damage of any of your enemy back. In rank 6 there are a couple of choices over here. If I were to make the Space Knight type of build, I would definitely go with damage aftermath. This one increases damage for guns, power and melee. The bonus damage over here is just too good to pass. I mean, you can have all the defenses you want, but you will need offenses as well. Singularity, another very good AoE ability. So my proposed loadout over here would be to go with radius at rank 4. As I've said, there are a few exceptions in the Biotic tree where I would pick radius. Singularity is one of them. In rank 4, I would go with the recharge speed. I want to cast Singularity as often as possible. And in rank 6, I like going for exploding Singularity. Lance is the next ability I'm going over. It's similar to throw when you tap throw. Most of the difference comes from the fact that Lance does some good amount of damage. In rank 4 I would go with damage and force. Radius is something that is not necessary over here. Most of the time we will use Lance to detonate combos. In rank 5 I always pick anti-shields. The reason I'm not going with headshot or weak point bonus is because you're not really going to do any headshots with this ability. It doesn't have enemy tracking. The headshot and weak points perk I would pick only if I were to fight architects, because their limbs have weak points, so it's definitely the better choice over there. But versus anything else, especially groups of enemies, the anti-shield one is definitely the better one. Rank 6 I always went with shield powered. Even though it says it costs 45%, you can reduce its cost with certain passives. The other perk, the knockdown, is also very good, but again, possibility of spamming this ability definitely trumps the 20% damage and force that you receive from it. So yeah, that was it with the active abilities, and now we will go over the passive ones. Barrier is one of the passives that I always bring in any of my loadouts on Insanity, even if I don't use any biotic abilities. In rank 4, both of the choices are quite good. You can either go for direct buff to max shields or pick up the regeneration one. Biotic Link is something that I always went for. It makes it so that the maximum shield strength increases as long as an enemy is affected by a biotic ability. So this ties in very well with either Annihilation or Singularity, which have huge area of effects and affect a lot of enemies at the same time, so you will receive a hefty buff to your shields. In the 6th rank we have other 2 good passives. Most of the time I pick Saving Barrier because I simply play too reckless, and Saving Barrier just saves me way too many times, and its internal cooldown is rather low, only 10 seconds, but the other perk is also good. It restores 10% of your shields on Biotic kill, so pick whatever you want. I would definitely say Saving Barrier is good most of the time. Offensive Biotics, as the name might imply, makes Biotic abilities better and it increases their usefulness. In rank 4 I typically pick Amplitude for the increased damage. In rank 5 I always go with Exploitation. The 20% defense debuff is simply too good, but the detonation one is also a solid choice, especially if you go for the full adept profile. In rank 6 both of the abilities are very good, so again, if you're picking a full-on caster build, pick the Biotic Expert. If you're making a weapon damage build, then definitely pick the Biotic Warrior. So containment isn't something that I typically go in unless I just want to spend more points in the Biotic tree, or I'm speccing exclusively or very much in the Biotic tree. In rank 4 I typically go with Radius. For example, in my adept build I went with Radius to extend the effect of Annihilation and or Singularity. In rank 5 I always like to go with Combo versus Shields. The Shield Detonator perk is definitely good because you're going to encounter way more shielded enemies than other types of enemies. A rank 6, yet again we have some very good choices here, so you could either pick the Manifold Duration, which increases the duration of Biotic power effects by 10% per affected enemy up to 40%, so if you want your enemies to be under the effect of Biotic abilities you would go with this. But Event Horizon is also very good, and it's something that I normally go with, especially if I'm picking Singularity or Annihilation. It extends the area of effect radius a lot, and the force also is very good. And that was basically my analysis for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you didn't see my previous episodes, make sure to go ahead and check them out, and I will see you guys next time.